What is up, guys? Austin Blankenship, Rack City MTG, coming at you with something a little bit different today. I could play it off as that I'm trying some new editing style where I'm going to come in after the league and like analyze it and go through it. But in reality, I am just messed up and I recorded an entire league that I thought was a good league worth uploading to YouTube with my microphone muted. So what we're going to do in this video is we're going to go through and we are going to use this as an opportunity to try something a little bit different where I am going to fast forward through some dead spots for you, talk about my decisions as I went, and kind of provide a post-analysis, a background of what's happening just in general for you guys who haven't seen things. I got a 5-0 with this deck list I'm getting ready to show you last night. I was not recording at the time, unfortunately. I wish I would have at least very quietly recorded maybe the last match or something, but I feel like that would have just jinxed it anyway. Tonight I got a 4-1 on camera, and I recorded the whole league, didn't have my microphone on the entire time, didn't realize it until I'd already uploaded it to YouTube, or at least was almost finished uploading it to YouTube. Couldn't figure out why there was no audio, looked down, saw that my mic was muted, instantly hit me. So what we're going to do is here, I'm going to go ahead and hit play, and this will actually give us an opportunity to skip through a lot of the dead air here. This is the deck list. For anyone familiar with the Facebook group or the Discord, you already have seen this list. The only notable changes to what I've ran in the past are an extra copy of Urza'a Saga and a copy of Expedition Map. I will probably hover over that for you, but as I can't do that right now because I'm giving a post-video input, and I'm showing, I'm probably talking about how I'm thinking about taking that Dismember out of the sideboard because I still am thinking about doing so. I never bring it in. I don't think I've brought it in once, but I'm going to fast forward the video now to the first match. And we get to skip all this dead air here too. It's kind of great. So let's go over opening hands here. I decide to take the draw as I typically do now. And we'll go through this league. Let me know if you guys prefer this format. It's going to make for a much shorter and much faster video, but you don't get to see me react live to what's happening. And there might be some things that I don't remember and some things that I miss going over this because I'm kind of in spectator mode myself. This is probably me explaining why I'm keeping said hand and everything. We're going to fast forward to 8 minutes here. I do make a little bit of a punt this game one, and when we get to it, I'll show you. But as of now, we're turn one Thoughtseizing here. Or I think it might actually be game 2 that I make the punt. Well, I'll just be straight up. I F6 through a land drop and didn't make my land drop for the turn. It ended up not punishing me. So right here, if you can tell what's on screen, I end up taking the Teferi because I'm not too concerned about counterspell or expansion in this spot. I have a lot of ways just to slowly deplete their resources. And I'm sure I just double Raven's Crime here. That's me probably going over, from that expansion explosion, I knew that it was probably a Wilderness Reclamation deck. And was probably debating and explaining, like, hey, that they might be considering copying it with their own expansion explosion here to make us discard a card. But we wouldn't have cared about that because then we just got the free explosion out of their hand. That card's kind of it's kind of a sideways win condition for their deck. I am curious. I don't quite remember exactly what decision I make here. I think I just keep. I think I try to get their hand as empty as I can because we still know there's an expansion in hand. There it goes. I think I end up. I was gonna say. I think I ended up just going Expedition Map and the rack here. It puts on a better clock. So opponent doesn't play anything, whereas they play the land. I'm sure we just go Saga here. Yeah, there's a percentage where maybe you take one of these Ravens crimes. But yeah, this was really interesting because I remember they choose to expansion this. And looking at this play, you all tell me if you think this was the right play to cast this Smallpox here. My idea was that they're not going to be casting a spell for a while. We have plenty of lands to work with, and they end up expansioning it, and it kind of feels bad. But at the time, I'm just sitting there thinking, well, like we don't really care if they Stone Rain us, and there is the spot here where I kick myself a little bit for not tapping mana to get a land with that expedition map. So the first matches here were actually a little bit rough, all things considered. But I was talking at the time and got ahead of myself. This is such a huge, like such a wildly easy matchup because they do a lot of what I like to call wheel spinning. And I don't remember exactly what I do here. I would guess I probably crack this map for another Saga and just play the Shrieking Affliction as we can tap it for black because of the Urborg. But yep, that's what I do. And that's pretty much all she wrote for this game. We've got dealing a bunch of damage to them at their upkeep. We get to make a construct on our turn before we sack our Saga. They're doing more wheel spinning with playing the growth spirals, cycling them instead of ramping with them. Okay, so like I said, that me not tapping my mana there didn't punish me too hard. This next game, I'm a little bit embarrassed by. I will fast forward here to the end of the sideboarding and kind of tell you what I brought in. Where this is a video being overlaid of a video, the picture quality is down a little bit, but that is Rotting Regisaur right there. I took out 3 Fatal Push for that. I believe I brought in an extra Pithing Needle. That's what I brought in. Extra Pithing Needle over the Bontu's Last Reckoning. I'm just going to skip through this dead air here for you, and we'll get to mulligan decisions. And I keep this hand. This is the one that I'm kind of embarrassed about that I forget to make this land drop, and it ends up being fine. We still win this game because we have such a good matchup against them. But I promise this is the only point where I make some not so great plays. The rest of the league was pretty solid. But I'm not going to edit out when I play poorly. It's a learning experience for me. It gives you guys something to look at and say, hey, these are things you want to avoid and these are mistakes you want to avoid. Not really so much in missing your land drop, but that is something just generally in Magic that you want to avoid. I believe I brought in the Hex Parasite as well. Yeah, this is where, see, like I for whatever reason, I think I'd even mentioned, like, I'm going to play this Urza'a Saga here, and then I didn't, because my idea was, well, let's see if they have a way to interact with our Saga before we play it. And they didn't, and then I skipped through the turn right here. But I take this Force Negation here. I'm actually going to speed this up just a little bit. And we'll get to this point to show that where they will cast this Teferi. Had I seen the Teferi, I wouldn't have played the Saga, and I think that's why I skipped it, because I thought, oh, I can't play the Saga into this Teferi. Because Saga, unlike any other land, can be bounced with Teferi. I remember I intentionally did not play the Rack Out right here because of that Engineered Explosives on one, and I did not play the Saga here because you get punished a little bit more with the second Teferi, and I wanted to wait for that Saga trigger to go onto the stack as late as possible so that we could maximize our mana with Liliana of the Veil here. And I see myself highlighting it right there. I'm probably explaining why I didn't play that. It is. I kind of like being able to cut through some of this dead spot right here. We each discard. There's a little sequencing where our opponent bounces his own engineered explosives to try to get rid of our Liliana here. And he does so, and he gets rid of our Liliana, then we just play the other Liliana. I think that was kind of the back-breaking. He kind of that was when he was done with the game, whether intentionally or unintentionally. I think here comes the Wilderness Reclamation I was talking about. Oh, never mind. It was the Prismatic Ending. Oh, so I got that backwards. He does do that at some point. I probably play the Saga here. Yeah, because now that gives us where on our next turn we have the ability to go threat and um, attack with the Mishra's Factory. And I like the idea of doing that. This opponent, I think, has no known cards in hand left at this point. So upticks Teferi. We're not too awful concerned about Teferi right here. I think we've played around engineered explosives well this game. Like we didn't play the rack out to it, and now we get to take the sequencing where we grab the Pithing Needle and it enters the battlefield before he has the chance to pop the engineered explosives, and then that's when we can play out our rack. So we've been holding our rack for that point to try to disincentivize him from making the engineered explosives a 1-for-1 because he knows that we have a lot of 1-mana permanents in our deck. Opponent still deciding what he's going to discard here. I might fast forward through this just a little bit. Let's do that. We crew up the Mutavault here and attack the Teferi. That makes it so I'm probably highlighting the fact that he cannot bounce my Saga now. And that's the part that I was worried about, was that he could bounce my Saga and I would not be able to get to the Pithing Needle. And he would have drawn the card. So I was probably explaining why I attacked Teferi instead of the player, but I'm sure if you're watching it, you probably figured that out anyway. If you're following along here. I think now comes the Wilderness Reclamation. Yeah, that's what I was expecting, that pretty early. And there I'm talking about, I said, you don't play that card, Expansion Explosion. It's kind of a backup win condition with Wilderness Reclamation, but seeing a 4-color version of this deck is really interesting. It didn't perform great against us, but I'm curious how the rest of his league went. Once again, going to, well, we already got through. I was going to say the spots where our opponent's playing a little bit slower, I'll try to fast forward through that more. Yeah, we just make the construct here. Gives us an opportunity to, we make another construct and we get to stop this Pithing Needle, or excuse me, stop this engineered explosives with Pithing Needle. And we know that unless he has something, that there's no way for him to really interact with our board. So I think we start out by ticking Liliana to make him, ticking up Liliana. Because there is a spot here where they might Cryptic Command bounce Liliana. Okay, our opponent probably misunderstands what Veil of Summer does right there. Because we didn't cast a... We're probably just showing us that he had it, or casting it just to cast it. I think, looking back, I think maybe I should have played the rack in this spot. I should have definitely done so, I believe. And that way I would have gotten an extra 1 damage in on them and been able to kill the Teferi just the same. But I don't think it matters too much, but it's nice to point out plays that are slightly less optimal, so when they matter in the future, they stick out in your brain and you remember it. This part's kind of nice where we get to skip through our dead air a little bit here. So let's go. I think I keep this hand. This is the one match we lose, and I almost get... What'll happen occasionally when you take the draw is that people will accidentally skip through their first turn. And that's something that would never happen in paper, right? Like, you just wouldn't let them do that. but they'll have already F6 because they saw that they lost the die roll, and you accidentally get an extra card and a first turn. So I was kind of upset at first, thinking maybe that was what happened. The opponent stopped themselves. Let's see what I do right here. Yeah, I'll go ahead and play out the Spellbomb, because at this point, I'm not for sure if they are a graveyard-centric version of this deck, or if they're just a Burning Inquiry version of the deck. And it turns out later on we discover they're a little bit of both. I talk about my one of Bontu's Last Reckoning being the exact reason why I'm running it as a one of, is because of this matchup right here. If I remember correctly, I don't think it's this. It's either this matchup or game 2 that we end up winning. But their deck is very, very good against our deck. If I remember correctly, I think I could just take the Burning Inquiry here. And there's an argument maybe for the Neonate, but my idea of this is that they just play as much of their hand as possible onto the board into our board wipe, was what my hope was. But I'm going to fast forward through my decision-making process here, because I've already laid that out for you. Yeah, we took the Burning Inquiry. We knew the Root Walla was coming in this spot, and it's important to note, I noted several times, with a Madness ability, the creature never actually hits the graveyard. So there's no way for me to respond with like Nihil Spellbomb it to keep it from hitting the to keep it from coming back. Like it goes straight into exile. It's never in the graveyard until, if for whatever reason they decided not to cast it, then it would be. This Root Walla that they have here is very, very good. Gets in for a lot of damage for very often a free, essentially 0 mana creature, because a lot of times they'll go turn 1 Cookbook, turn 1 discard the Root Walla. I'm trying to remember here if I board wipe or not, so let's go ahead and wait and see. I think I board wipe it with the expectation that we're going to Pithing Needle name the Cookbook eventually, and then we'll have the we'll eventually have a blocker for the future Root Walla. This is a good example, though, that turn 3 board wipe, the reason why to run the turn 3 board wipe over the turn 4 board wipe, even though it's such a, your lands not untapping is such a crazy downside, is that we only really want a board wipe exactly the games where the board wipe matters. I think maybe I'll lose this game. We go 1 and 2 against them here, spoiler alert, but they're going to get a Root Walla here, and I think they maybe just have a way to get the last point of damage in. I can't remember for sure. And another spoiler, they managed to kill us through a turn 3 board wipe twice. So I'm not entirely sure the best way to sideboard against this deck. I think this is just a bad matchup. Heads up, a bad matchup. Because we have our primary sideboard card in our opening hand this game. So we knew that part was coming. If I remember right, yeah, because where our lands don't untap, we knew that we were dead. So I'll skip through sideboarding here. All you really have to know is I bring in both the Regisaurs and the board wipes in this matchup and take out the Smallpoxes. And we take out a couple of the Raven's Crimes too, because letting them get to decide what they discard is kind of bad. And losing our mana is kind of bad in this matchup, because they'll often just discard a Madness card if we Raven's Crime them or Smallpox them, and they get all sorts of value out of that. I'm going to fast forward a little bit here. And I believe this has got to be the game we win, right? Because we go 1-2 in this matchup. This is the only game we lose. We look good against this Flameblade Adept here. I can't remember if I dismember it or not. I think I go ahead and wait, maybe, until we see if they have a spell to cast. I think I talk about the Urza'a Saga there, not playing it, because I really want to curve into Rotting Regisaur in turn 3. So curving into Regisaur in turn 3 and playing the Saga on turn 2 means we don't want to activate the Saga to make the artifacts um, on turn 3, right? So we make the least use of the Saga on turn 2 very often. Most of the time, we kind of want to wait till turn 3 to play it. So that's something worth noting if it's a deck that you plan on playing, or the version of the deck you plan on playing at any point. Yeah, I think I just go ahead and dismember this. And I do this every time too, where I forget that if you pay any mana into it, you have to click your life total first. So we dismember it. I'm sure I just slammed the Regisaur here as a big blocker for the Rootwalla. I'm probably sitting there debating on whether or not to cast the Inquisition, but that would definitely be... Okay, I snapped that off pretty hard. The Rotting Regisaur, because that gives us a card to discard in our hand in the Inquisition to our Regisaur later. Regisaur does a lot in these sorts of matchups. It's almost better than the board wipes. You'll see here they commit a lot of resources. I can't remember if it's this game or the next game to kill this Regisaur. Like they'll get the cookbook here and this creature here, the Asmarano Mardicata Istanakoldakar. There we go. That's close enough, right? You know who I'm talking about. And they go the double value here of getting the cookbooks. Okay, and this is the game that we Pithing Needle the cookbooks, and we get really far ahead. But they sacrifice. They commit a lot of resources here. You'll see her activated ability lets a creature do 6 damage to itself, and they basically discarded 1 functional card from their hand, 2 not so functional cards from their hand. But here this sets up really nicely where we Inquisition them to see what they have, and then it sets up where, and we see there's a Vengevine, and we know that even though we can't take that Vengevine, that they're just going to cast that Vengevine next turn. So it puts us in a position where we get to know that we're going to board wipe, and we get a Pithing Needle. You'll notice there's a Squee Goblin Nabob here in the graveyard, and that Squee allows them to create a little bit of an engine with these Underworld cookbooks. So if they have things like Feasting Troll King, which allows you to sacrifice 3 foods to return them from your graveyard to the battlefield. So we have the ability to activate Saga and block here, and we just end up chump blocking this Vengevine. But they don't know that a board wipe's coming up to this point, and then we string board wipe into Pithing Needle on the cookbook. And this game, that was I think that's kind of the recipe to beat them, is specifically, you have to be able to stop their engine, which is not a graveyard engine, mind you. This version of the deck it's more so than most. I think I'd just be smart and just float mana here. Because when you play the Reckoning, you really don't want to tap a lot of your mana the turn before if you can get away with it. So we get the Underworld Cookbook here. So that turns off their value engine. I think we probably just play the Saga here in board wipe, if I'm guessing. And leave the Saga untapped. That way we know that we can make our Construct token the following turn with our untapped Swamp. Yeah, that would be the correct line of play. So they just cast the Squee. That's a very good sign. I think I even mentioned here too, like, man, that's so wild that every time we would board wipe, they would always end up, so that's 4 or 5, that's only 6 power this time. But that has the potential to represent so much power on their part. At this point, we're starting to deal damage to them with the Shrieking Afflictions. So I make the call here that, hey, I'm not going to block this Vengevine here because, and like I'm not just going to chump block it. I'm going to just go ahead and block the Squee, keep this Construct around, because after this turn, we'll be set up where we can... I think I end up drawing a Fatal Push here, actually. And that way I can go get, yep, so I can trigger Revolt off this Fatal Push by sacrificing this Saga. I go get a Nihil Spellbomb, and that way, when I get to the point where I want to, like I want to get in and attack and get that extra point of damage here. And then I Nihil Spellbomb away the Vengevine so they can't get it back. Notably, attacking right there puts us in a spot that we're dead to Burning Inquiry, but we're dead to some combination of Vengevines and things anyway. So I think the right decision is to just, instead of min-maxing there, max-minning, and the high end is that we kill them the next turn. Like there's nothing they can do about it. I think they were kind of feigning and tapping like they had a Goblin lore there. But also notably, we got rid of their Squee Goblin Nabob, so they couldn't get it back from the graveyard at their upkeep like they typically can. I think they just cast the hollow one here. And we're just in such good shape. They get in for one, and that kills them because they attack. Because now they're in a spot where if we discard them in any way, that they lose. Yeah, I think I'll go ahead and just get another look at my deck here to see. Okay, and then there was the rack that they knew at this point that they were dead no matter what. So they're taking a lot of damage in their upkeep, and now those constructs are 4/4s. So they just scoop. So we did pick up a game against them. And it's a really, really hard matchup to navigate, A. And B, I think I'm discussing right there that there's a chance that we died to Burning Inquiry, but that you just have to, there just becomes a point where you just have to try to kill them. But let's fast forward a little bit. This game 3, this is one we lose, and it's a little bit upsetting. Because we removed their turn 1 creature, right? And it's just to show you, this is the perfect example of how powerful their deck is. So they Burning Inquiry. It's actually not that big of a deal. I think they might get a hollow one here. Yeah, and play a land and get the Vengevine back. Yeah, so we deal with their turn 1 creature. And they still somehow on turn 2 manage to get 11 power in play on turn 2 after us killing the turn 1 creature and are still swinging for 4. Had that turn 1 creature survived, they would have been an unbelievable amount of damage coming our way. So at this point, I remember just deciding that the Thoughtseizes aren't good enough, but if I Raven's Crime them and they have a Basking Root Walla, that the only chance that I have to win this game is them overcommitting to the board and me Hail Mary top decking a board wipe. I don't think too much about this Ox of Agonis that's in the graveyard, but you'll see here in a minute. Okay, so I knew the Root Walla was coming, right? Or at least I thought that it would be coming. That's why I was very hesitant with the Raven's Crime, or excuse me, the Thoughtseize over the Raven's Crime, because there's a chance that they have no cards in hand or just all lands and a Root Walla, right? So we Thoughtseize, we take the 2 extra damage, and they still get the Root Walla anyway, because it's not a May ability. But here, we're just praying to the magic gods that we top deck a board wipe. We have 4 of them, and this is the exact matchup where we need the turn 3 board wipe every time. And I'm a little bit excited and fired up, and guess what we top deck here? The board wipe. But you'll see here in a minute, it doesn't even matter. So notice this here. This is a turn 3 board wipe. And check out their recovery turn here. I think they get the Root Walla back. Oh no, so no, they just discard the Burning Inquiry because they're not too worried about it. But they will go Ox right here. And I believe they get their Vengevine back too. Like, it's just unbelievable how fast this deck recovers. And this was if I had known that they were on the Ox plan too and had different ways to recur Vengevine, I probably should have brought in the Leyline of the Voids. But there's so many different versions of this deck. And most of them don't really have a whole lot of ways to recur Vengevine outside of outside of just getting them off randomly burning inquiry or dumping it. Yes, yeah, and they get the root wall, they get the cast for free, and that gives them lethal this turn. So that's a turn 4 kill through a board wipe on turn 3 and through a fatal push on their 1-drop. And that's why I say, like, I think that deck right there is secretly the best deck in Modern. I remember I give my opponents the GGs here and talk to him for a second, just because that's one of the nuttiest games of Magic that I had ever played against that game 3. We're going to skip through the dead air here. This part's kind of nice. Like, you guys let me know how you feel about this sort of editing. I'm pretty positive I mulligan this hand. Yeah. I end up keeping that hand and sending back a swamp, I think. It is wins from here on out, though, guys, so it gets much more uphill from here. This match is Hardened Scales, and I talk about a lot. Maybe the one deck that I have just as much, if not more, experience piloting is Hardened Scales. So this matchup I'm very, very comfortable with. I'm not sure how much our opponent actually has played the deck before after I played against them, because especially game 3, they make a very fatal error. I take the Power Conduit here, because Power Conduit plus... I even highlighted here, thankfully. But that Power Conduit plus Urza'a Saga just lets them keep making constructs indefinitely while also getting +1/+1 counters on their creatures. And it's a pretty busted combination. I've not got to test it myself any because I've been so enamored with what the rack's doing right now. But it's something that I'll probably, at some point, play a little bit of. Just because, like I said, I very much so like playing both of these decks. I'm pretty sure I take the Ballista here, yeah. Because there's the sacrifice. The Ballista represents one of the easiest ways for them to kill us, especially with the Throne of Geth. I think I consider Smallpoxing this next turn, but I don't think I do. I think I just Thoughtseize. Yeah, Smallpoxing here would have been bad, but they didn't play their creature anyway. But I take their last creature, I play the land. How it ends up working out here later, just to give a little bit of a spoiler, I win this game 1 by double Smallpoxing in a spot that you all tell me if you think that was the right play or not. I had a Liliana, and I was kind of trying to... Earlier I talked about like max minning instead of min-maxing. In this spot, I was min-maxing, meaning I'm minimizing the maximum punishment because I feel like that I was ahead in the cards regardless. So I thought that dealing with both of their creatures and stone raining them twice was much better than playing the Liliana and down ticking, because they have certain draws. Like, had they drawn a Ravager off the top and I had not done that, I would probably just be dead. Hardened Scales is one of the most explosive decks that can kind of kill you out of nowhere. I'm going to fast forward through, because that's like I go through this whole decision process myself here. And I've already went over that with you to save a little bit of time. But I get a little bit annoyed with myself here because I don't... Ideally, I would want to keep the Urborg and the Mishra's Factory here, and I don't tap the swamp for mana before I cast the Smallpox, so I can't sacrifice that swamp. But it ends up not mattering, and it shouldn't. In the grand scheme of things, it probably shouldn't matter. I think I just end up sacking the Urborg there just in case. It's relevant to have the body, but that leaves them with basically nothing at this point. And we have they even get rid of their Yawgmoth Nexus here. So they have practically nothing. We have a body in play. We make the right decision on this part and cast this sort of effect so that we deal them 3 instead of 2. And from here, it's just... Hardened Scales is kind of a critical mass type deck. And excuse me, I shouldn't say that. It's kind of a combo deck, really. And they really are assembling a certain combination of cards. And if you know how their deck operates, they're pretty easy to disrupt. If you don't know how the deck operates, and you're looking at it and trying to solve what's going on across from you, the Hardened Scales player that's a good adept player just gets so many free wins. In this specific spot right here, I'm not too worried about this Yawgmoth Nexus because they would need a Ravager and a land to do much with it. And so I know that if I just get in here and clock them, which you can't block with the factory anyway, but I know that I'm in a winning spot right here because they have to have a blocker. I think maybe they get in with the Yawgmoth Nexus and then realize that they mess up and just scoop from that. I'm not sure if they're a newer player to the deck or if they just. It's really hard to. I would say that Hardened Scales might be the most difficult deck to play. Like it's close. It and Amulet Titan are pretty close, but yeah, I'm going to fast forward through the sideboarding. I just bring in the Pithing Needle. Notably, I don't bring in the Bontu's Last Reckoning, and I debate really hard about bringing the Hex Parasite. On the surface, Hex Parasite seems pretty good, but I think I do bring it in just because it's better than a lot of things in the matchup. Yeah, I end up going back down on some of the Last Reckoning. Board wipes are okay against them, but as you'll see this game too, they have welding jars and things, and one of the biggest differences between Bontu's Last Reckoning versus Damnation, or the new card Dam, is that they can regenerate their creatures with the welding jars. And that can be pretty big so if you're playing a black-white deck and you have the access to Dam over Damnation, or excuse me, over Bontu's Last Reckoning, it's probably worth it to play the 4 copies of Dam before you play even 1 copy of Bontu's Last Reckoning. If you're a black-white Smallpox player, you already know that. And so I'm definitely preaching to the choir there, but it's just something for someone it might not have occurred to them up to this point. So it's something worth keeping in mind, that Affinity's kind of everywhere. This is me. I'm still trying to reason through what I'm going to take out. It doesn't matter too awful much. So we'll fast forward here to the opening hands. This is one of those spots where I feel like I punted a little bit at the time, but then looking at it, I played it optimally. They just had everything they needed to have. They're a deck that just kind of gets out of hand. The only regret that I had in this one particular spot here is I debated about whether or not I should have snapped off that Fatal Push so quickly, or if I should have held up Fatal Push, or if I should have Thoughtseized. Because Thoughtseizing, if they were on the Power Conduit game plan here, would have been much more rewarding. But they mulled to 5. And you'll see here, like, this is one of my favorite decks in Modern, because they recover so well. Like, they're on a mull to 5, they're being really disrupted, and they can just piece together the pieces they need to win still. I know that my game plan at this point was to Pithing Needle the Walking Ballistas in their hand. And that's why I took the Ozolith versus the Walking Ballistas, and I'm analyzing here, like, okay, what's the way that I die the quickest? And it's from it was from that Hangerback Walker, or excuse me, it was from Ravager plus Ozolith. And that is actually how I die later, is Ravager plus the Ozolith. And you all let me know if you want me to go into more depth into my opponent's decks. I try not to too much, because this is an 8-rack channel. Like, that's the 8-rack is the purpose of the channel. That's why I built the channel. It is my favorite deck. I have played plenty of other Modern decks, though, before, and so, like, especially Hardened Scales, where I've played about as much Hardened Scales as most people have, period. And it's something I greatly enjoy playing. It kind of works out that usually when the rack really, really struggles in the meta, Hardened Scales does pretty good. So, like, it's in the past, at least. So it kind of would give me a buffer that I could play either one. I think I get a little bit upset that they get the Ozolith there, because that card is so good. It's almost definitely better than Mox Opal was in this list. Not in regular Affinity, but in Hardened Scales Affinity. Because Hardened Scales Affinity doesn't use Mox Opal mana very well. They have a lot of wanting to get the 2 mana spells. Yeah, we know, like, we're planning on getting this Pithing Needle here. I think I might Ravenscrime them at this point. I don't remember for sure. This is one of those spots where, knowing that the Ballista was in hand, I still Pithing Needled that. In retrospect, I should have either Pithing Needled Inkmoth Nexus or Arcbound Ravager. It's just hard to figure out where the game's going to go. Because we don't know what their hand is from that point. And with that Welding Jar, they have a protection. We're thinking, well, we have a board wipe, so if they name another creature, well, excuse me, 100%, especially because of the board wipe, we should have named the Inkmoth Nexus to effectively shut down their game plan. But Scales it's a tough deck to play against, a pretty tough deck to play too. At this point, we know that they're just going to discard the Walking Ballista where we had named it, but we're we get the extra damage from the rack from doing so, and now we get them Hellbent. And we discover they have a Veil of Summer in hand. So at this point, it doesn't really look like we can lose the game. But this is kind of the amazing thing about Hardened Scales right here. They will top deck this Ravager that's coming up, and all of a sudden the game becomes, oh man, I might just die next turn. And that's so wild that they can do that. And a lot of it is thanks to Urza'a Saga, but especially Ravager. It creates such fun game patterns. And from here, I'm starting to get a little bit worried because I know that they have the Welding Jar to protect the Ravager now. So I know the Thoughtseize is dead. So pretty sure I just go ahead and get in for 4, then try to board wipe. The board wipe doesn't, or excuse me, I don't board wipe this turn. It's the next turn because I know that I can block the Ravager, so they would have to go all in on infect damage. And on this turn, they would be 1 infect damage short. If they did that. So I just get the Saga, get it online, and I think my idea here is that hopefully I could Pithing Needle the Ravager before they could kill me with the Ravager. But as you'll see, that does not work out. They get a free turn here, and they wisely, the big thing is they keep back blockers. If memory serves correctly, they get an Arcbound Worker right here. Yeah, they do. And this card serves as essentially 4 counters for them because of how it works with the Ozolith. And they basically can't afford to get Fatal Pushed either right here. I think they play around that to a degree. I think I've counted it up. I'll do it again right here. So if they go to combat, if they just went all in here, they would have the okay. So before they were at 8, playing that Inkmoth Nexus. Had they played the Inkmoth Nexus, turned it into an artifact by tapping itself, then sacrificing it to Ravager, they would have had the full 10 infect that turn, I believe. But this is the exact moment too, where if you look, had I put that Pithing Needle on the Inkmoth Nexus, I would win the game from this spot. And that's relevant. Now, had they had the Walking Ballista on the battlefield with the Arcbound Ravager, maybe things would be a little bit different. They don't. If memory serves correctly, I get in here. Because there's no reason not to attack here. And I'm hoping that they blow their Welding Jar at this point, blocking my construct. But them blocking here and being able to sacrifice still represents the same amount of counters. And at this point, I know I'm dead, but I think I felt like that they could have killed us last turn had they sacrificed the Inkmoth to itself. But they would have sacrificed their entire board, and I might have had Fatal Push. They were probably playing around their worst scenario, knowing that they were still in pretty good shape on the board. But I board wipe here, and you'll see like they sacrificed the Thopter, I think, to the Ravager, and then Welding Jar the Ravager. And then I believe they top deck just literally any artifact, and they just win the game. because it's so much easier for them to get to 10. So anything in their deck that I call it it cuts the amount of counters they need in half. So the Ozolith and Yawgmoth Nexus are kind of their secret payoffs. That it effectively cuts the amount of counters in their deck they needed to. Y'all can tell me right there what you think. Maybe it was right to go ahead and get in with the Mishra's Factory 2 and not board wipe, but I don't think so. I think I was dead no matter what in this spot. I think the point of decision was the Pithing Needle should have been on Yawgmoth Nexus and not Ballista, despite me knowing the Ballista in hand. But they would have probably sequenced much differently as well. So at this point, they just can't play around anything anymore, and I'm sure they know that. So they know if they sacrifice the Ravager to itself, it puts the 5 counters on the Yawgmoth Nexus, and Modular works favorably with the Ozolith, right? So Ozolith is whenever you leaves the battlefield, you put that many counters on the Ozolith, and then it puts on the combat. At the beginning of their combat, it'll trigger. But they know they're dead to my rack the next turn, so they just have to go all in and make sure that I don't, just test and see if I have a Fatal Push. And I do not, and I lose. But game 3, I believe I take out some number of board wipes, maybe. Or I think I just run it back. This game, I think I play it pretty well. I just go ahead and I Fatal Push, or I Raven's Crime that. I believe I just snap off the Fatal Push. It's interesting to me in this spot. I think my idea was that I'm not planning on playing the Liliana the next turn, and that I'm going to see if they play another creature, and if they play a creature that Zabaz would modular onto, I will Fatal Push Zabaz in response. And then that gives me the option, which notably I decide not to play Liliana and downtick here because that's just a 1-for-1. And my sagas are already going to be, my saga constructs are already going to be big enough to block that Ballista because the expedition map's in play. So I'm not too worried about it at this point. We'll go ahead and get our full value out of our saga before we play our Liliana. I'm talking about Zabaz, how the modular trigger is really cool, where Hardened Scales is all about the incremental. Whenever one counter gets put on something, 2 counters gets put on it instead. Here I'll wise it up a lot, and I get the Pithing Needle for Ravager, I believe, is the game plan. Because Ballista is only really a payoff when you have something like Ravager that can put all the counters on it. This one right here really just goes, and it shows the full power of how the aggressive version of the deck can play. Or when we get aggressive, I believe we get like, something like 10, 12 power on the battlefield here. And for an 8-rack deck to have 10, 12 power on the battlefield on turn 4, it just gives you so much extra of a dimension. And if you activate the Mishra's Factory, it gets even more than that. Yeah, so it's 10 power. If you activate the factory, it turns to 14 power. And we have more ways to get that bigger in hand. It's worth mentioning that we're in a spot here that our Saga tokens are bigger than the Artifact deck's Saga tokens, and they can't really do a whole lot of tricks with the Ravager. Yeah, I think I pretty aggressively am saying I don't want to cast this Smallpox this turn. And my thought process here, I believe, is to play that out, get as much damage as I can in, and then use the map to just go ahead and get another Saga. And that's me thinking, well, just try to make sure it doesn't change the way that the combat math works here. But then I kind of think, well, I can just activate the Mishra's Factory and get them back to where it was before. I believe I go ahead and crack this map here. Or no, excuse me, I think I'll leave the Mishra's Factory. I think I have a little bit of a debate here, because now that the Pithing Needle on Ravager is gone, I just go ahead and decide to respect the Ravager and leave the Mishra's Factory back as a potential blocker, and then use the Expedition map at instep if I don't need the Mishra's Factory as a blocker. Because Ravager is specifically the card that it can kill you on its own. And notably, too, I have a Raven's Crime in the graveyard. And so if I do get a land off this map here, my game plan is at that point to just get a land that I'm going to pitch to the Raven's Crime anyway, more than likely to deal them the final bits of lethal damage. But I want to wait till the last minute before I make any decision like that. They get the Ozolith. The Ozolith is, like I said before, it's debatably the best card in their deck. And now we have the Yawgmoth Nexus, but it's a bit of too little too late here. I think they go all in without realizing that they don't have the kill this turn, and they just scoop to that. Yeah, they do. Maybe they're thinking that the Yawgmoth Nexus could attack this turn, but they waited to play it until just now. Or if they're thinking that, yeah, and they just go ahead and scoop. Because it appears that the player was newer to the deck, and it's a very, very difficult deck to play. Because game one, they did a couple of funky things, too. But yeah, we got there fairly easily. I think that's one of our better matchups if you know how to pilot it against it. And yeah, not too big of a problem. Nothing much else to say. We'll go ahead and skip through it. We're 2-1 at this point, and we can fast forward a pretty good ways. So we're in the blind. I think I keep this hand, if I remember correctly. And I remember saying that this looks like an awful, awful hand, and it's really important to take a look at this hand. And this hand ends up being absolutely busted, though. And my idea behind it is that the two artifacts already in hand, ready for that Urza'a Saga, are going to be very, very good. If I remember correctly, we play a Mardu Reanimator deck right here that looked sweet. Like, it looked so cool. The guy left the game before I could get his deck list from him, but it was sweet. It was like a Mardu, and its sideboard plan was kind of to shift into this cool Mardu mid-range deck. And I saw someone in chat mention that they wanted to play like some form of Reanimator in the Discord, so if you were watching, here you go, man. Like this was one of the cooler ones. I mentioned in the video that I feel like Urza'a Saga kind of invalidates that strategy right now a bit. Yeah, pretty sure. I'll just play the map right here. I'm gonna start using the skip 10-second button a little bit more aggressively here. So we'll do that. We Thoughtseize to see what they are. At this point, we still think there's Mardu mid-range. And I kind of like lose my crap a little bit because I see that they have Persist and a big beater next turn. And they were getting ready to just... They mimicked Mardu mid-range so well. And we're getting ready to just discard that card with their Channeler and just absolutely take us to Pound Town. And that would have been so sweet, but luckily for us, we Thoughtseize them in time to see what they were doing and what they were up to. But kudos for our opponent. They played that. They very much so disguised what they were doing well. And I like players that know how to do that when they play these combo decks. Because the longer that you can disguise what you're doing, the more chance you have for your opponent to make mistakes. I'm probably talking about how this saga is just going to beat their brains in right here at this point. So I want to 10-second skip that. I think I just play the other saga at this point because my thought process is, well, the first saga is going to get the Nihil Spellbomb, and the second saga will let me keep the train of like just beating them down. And that way I have a very fast clock and I have a way to disrupt any instant speed, or excuse me, any Reanimator shenanigans after this turn. So my whole idea here is that they have to, without the Persist, they specifically would have to both find a way to get their creature into their graveyard and bring it back this one turn. So I feel pretty safe at this spot. I don't think there's really much they do here. They just don't attack and play a land, so we'll skip through it a little bit. These are towards the end of the league, so they're a lot more fresh in my mind. At this point, we get our Spellbomb and we activate this. So now they're kind of, I think I just go ahead and even play the rack so that I put them on a much, much faster clock. You look here, it's another game that turn 4. I think these are 6/6s on turn 4. And just that pivot that we get to make to this super aggressive construct beatdown deck with like disruptive elements and the Nihil Spellbombs and the Pithing Needles and things. When you lean into that, the power level of the deck kind of hits another level. At this point, we kind of realize that they are on the game plan of just hard casting their creatures. So I believe all we have left is a rack. I think we just go ahead and play land and play the rack here instead of trying to draw a card later off that. That way we guarantee that either one of our constructs at this point is lethal. They do have a fatal push here that you'll see. And so we weren't really playing around that, but it doesn't really matter anyway. Like they're effectively dead no matter what they do. Because we still have the two big ones back. But those were 9/9s before this turn. And it still gets in for 8. And I guess he has to block here because that creature's Pithing Needled anyway. So it's not doing anything. But we still have the Nihil Spellbomb up, so they can't really disrupt our graveyard. And they're just, I don't think they play it out. They're just dead. They do play the Seasoned Pyromancer, but gives us the GG in chat. He was a pretty nice guy. I wish I would have got a deck list and stuff right. His deck looked really cool. I think I bring in the Leylines for this match. I do. I debate whether or not I should. I think I go down a couple Raven's Crime just because, once again, just like the Hollow One deck, where decks that want to discard their cards anyway, you want to minimize the amount that you're giving them free discards. I remember correctly, there's a hand with a couple of Kolaghan's commands, which are good. This is what I was talking about. I would just kind of, he sideboard shifted into like this normal Mardu mid-range deck. And I think that's a really cool idea, is to be a aggressive combo reanimator deck, but then be able to sideboard into like a value-y deck after people bring in the graveyard hate. So that's a neat thing to keep in mind if you want to build a deck like this. I think I just go ahead and take the second K command there if I remember right. And then I Fatal Push the Magmatic Channeler, because that's the one card that it can get the an insane boost to their reanimation spells out of nowhere, but I think they play the Kroxa here. We're going to keep skipping forward a little bit to try to save a little bit of time on the video. I get rid of the Raven's Crime because I know that the Crime's not particularly great against them. It's just nice to have a way to empty their hand late game. I just play the land right here instead of the second Saga because my game plan is that I'm going to Smallpox them anyway because I know that they're more than likely going to play this Kroxa out of their graveyard. And what I probably do here is get a Nihil Spellbomb if I remember correctly. And I just go ahead and tap that for black. I get the Spellbomb here. If I remember correctly, I just go ahead and Raven's Crime them since I'm going to have to discard this land anyway. To the Smallpox. And I already played the land for turn. My decision making here is that if they crack this fetch, I will blow up my Nihil Spellbomb in response to the fetch. That's because there's a chance that they have double fetch and get back Kroxa. But if they hadn't cracked the first, we just wanted to get rid of as many cards in their graveyard as possible. So in response to this first fetch, I just go ahead and crack it. Because had they have a second fetch land in hand, which we'll find out here in a second that they did have a second fetch land in hand, we maximize the amount of cards we could take out of their graveyard there for future Kroxas while not getting Kroxa that turn. And they'll play the Marsh Flats here. And funny enough here, instead of getting the rack at this point, I actually get a Pithing Needle here. And name that Marsh Flats, because my idea is that they're probably on the game plan of hardcasting their big beaters from this point on in the game, and where they didn't crack the. Oh, excuse me, I did not get it this time. I must get it the off this next saga is when I must get it. I think I thought about it there quite a bit. And I thought about Thoughtseizing, but I figured out pretty quickly that, okay, they either have a land in hand, or they have a big beater that we would be putting in their graveyard for free anyway. So there was no positive outcome of the Thoughtseize. It's me probably talking about Urza'a Saga more and how busted it is. But now we can play the factory and get back on that game plan. And this is the spot because they start, they start holding. It's very clear that they're holding spells to not take damage to this rack at this point. So I don't bother getting another rack here when this Urza'a Saga goes off. I Pithing Needle their Marsh Flats when they don't crack it again, especially since I already have a Shrieking Affliction there. And it's important to note that make sure your opponents know if you play this card in paper that as soon as you start shuffling your library to find something, they cannot respond. It goes straight onto the battlefield. Don't let them do that to you. So I think I've changed my mind and go on the Thoughtseize plan here to try to force some action because they weren't playing their lands, and the likelihood that they have 3 lands in hand is pretty low. And if they do, we've already got rid of their Marsh Flat, so they're kind of rough shape at that point. We are able to force a little bit of action here. They make us sacrifice a creature. We sacrifice the one that is summoning sick so that we can attack with the non-summoning sick one. I believe we still get a hit here. Yeah, we get to... I think we end up taking the Liliana here, actually. Yeah, we take the Liliana so that they can't make us sack that. Because at this point, they would need to not just draw a creature to reanimate, but also a way to get in their graveyard. So the persist is a little bit useless at this point. Yep, and this is what I was talking about where our Pithing Needle hit both of their Marsh Flats, so that was pretty neat. And I think we Fatal Push them here, and they just Fatal Push their creature here, and they just scoop to that. Because I know we get in for, I believe 6 here is what we get in for, and then they take 2 at their upkeep, so. I thought that was scoop lag there, but it was the cards doing something weird. And probably gave us the GG. Tried to get his deck list from him. He'd already left. Or tell him, excuse me, I was trying to tell him it was a cool deck, and he'd already left. So we skip through this dead air. This was pretty fun. I kept this in here because this was neat. So this is a game 1, and this was a long game 1. Our opponent, I don't know what they do, but we almost scooped this game 1. We were at a spot here, and so I'm talking about how this Smallpox is a good it's a good target, or it's a good time to Smallpox this card, or to just go ahead and Smallpox to basically double Stone Rain them and set them back a good turn. I got rid of the Thoughtseize because, as you saw, we Thoughtseized and there was only 1 Titan in their hand. They get rid of a Forest at this point. We have the ability to play the Saga, play the probably Ravens, start Ravens criming them. We draw the Bontu's Last Reckoning, which is actually pretty dead against them a lot of the time. But if they have a way to get things like Colony Garden and stuff like that after sideboard, it's fairly relevant. I think I'll just go ahead and name Windswept Heath here, because they didn't show me anything that indicated that they were the Reclaimer Titan deck with Elvish Reclaimer. So now I named the Windswept Heath in case they get in the situation where they want a lot of Valakut triggers with Dryad Arbor and Valakut that they can't get an extra trigger off getting a fetch land. And the 2 that most of them will play is Wooded Foothills and Windswept Heath, usually as a 1 of each, because they're usually the cheapest online. And that's a valid enough reason to run them. I think since I didn't draw a land here, I just go ahead and cycle this Spellbomb, because it'll be much better if we can play the land so that we can actually get the construct next turn, and we do get the land to play. I'll skip through this part here. Not a whole lot interesting happens until towards the end of the game. This is where I debate on whether or not I should float the mana so I can play the Liliana. I decide against it. I believe I just get another rack effect. Okay, excuse me, I get an Expedition map, and that's a bit better than a rack because it guarantees my 3rd land drop at some point. I always forget that's even in my deck until I start searching. So if you look here, he does get the Primeval Titan. He gives it haste. I think this is the spot where I just chump block and say I have to draw a land to get the board wipe, and I do get it. This is mentioned a few times. This is actually a pretty tough game one against them because they can recur their Titans in so many ways, and until you start disrupting that, they really like games 2 and 3. You can disrupt it pretty well. But yeah, they're in an interesting spot right here. They can't really play the Titans. They had the Summoner's Pact, but we also get time walked basically because of the way that our lands didn't untap. But we do get to play the Saga. I think I just go ahead and play the Rack right here and just get our hand empty for this Liliana the next turn. So now we know I could wait and show you everything happening with this Amulet Titan deck, but Teleria West gets Summoner's Pact. Summoner's Pact most of the time just gets a Titan. He has the way to give Titan haste on the battlefield, so I assume that he can't give it haste. So at first I think, well, maybe I'm dead right here because he can give it haste. If he has Vesuva in his deck to copy the Slayer's Stronghold, I think is what he could do. No, I guess there's no way. I'm kind of bummed out here thinking he's going to get Colony Garden to protect his Primeval Titan from an Edict. And he does not do that. He gets a way to transmute and get another Summoner's Pact. And he casts that second Summoner's Pact. And I believe gets a Dryad Arbor. And luckily here I top deck a land. And I'm able to Edict and hold back the blocker. This part upcoming here is where I'm not sure what happens. He has 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 mana available to him. So at his upkeep, so there's the Vesuva that I didn't know was in his hand that I thought was just in his, or that I thought was already on the battlefield somewhere. So that's when I think like, okay, we're dead. I almost scooped to these triggers on the stack. And it's pretty funny how this ends up working out. I think that maybe he accidentally hits... so my logic is, okay, I'm glad I didn't scoop, so I can play the land, Edict Liliana, then I can block the either the Dryad Arbor or the Primeval Titan with the Mishra's Factory. And that gives me a turn to, if he doesn't have a bounce land in hand, then he can't kill me with the battle triggers. So, but what I think happens right here is I think he accidentally hits no on this first Summoner's Pact instead of yes. And I think loses the game from that. Because it asks you the question, pay 4 mana, question mark, and you have to hit yes or no. I think he just hit no there. And not only does he scoop the game, you'll see here, he scoops the entire match. He salts out so hard over what just happened. So, we got a 4-1. Sorry we didn't get the filming right the first time. Edit it, added everything. Thank you all for watching.